everybody who is here today and who, very graciously said yes to being a panelist. Our first panelist is Dr. Laura J. Martin, who is an assistant professor for the Computer Science and Electric Engineering Department, researching human-centered AI with a focus on natural language processing applications. In addition, we have Dr. Farah Nibs, joined the faculty of the Emergency and Disaster Health Systems Department as an assistant professor in August 2023. Her research interest focuses on understanding and strengthening disaster management, public health, emergency preparedness, and infrastructure resilience across Caribbean small islands development states. And last, we have Dr. Pengguang Jia, who is a professor of the physics department and has been working at UMBC since 2014. His research interests are in light scattering by irregular particles, vector radiative, transfer in coupled atmosphere and ocean systems, and remote sensing hydrosols. I think I'm pronouncing that correct. Sorry for mispronouncing. With that, let's sort of dive directly into our first question. So looking back at all of your publications and presentations, is there one particular paper that sort of stands out, sort of being your favorite or that you're most proud of? And this can go to anybody in the panel.
I'll go first, I guess. Yeah, so just to reintroduce myself, I'm Laura Martin. And so I want to say that, like, for context, for all of the types of papers that I'm going to be talking about, so I do natural language processing, and within a lot of fields in computing in general, we mostly publish at conferences instead of journals. So normally there's kind of like this hierarchy of, like, journals are the most prestigious, and then there's conferences, and then there's workshops. So in a lot of computing fields, conferences and journals are kind of like the same. Journals are just like longer conference papers. So yeah, I actually have never published a journal paper, but I have several conference papers. And the with all of that long explanation, I think the paper that I'm most proud of is kind of like, I guess, the first paper where I had a like a real, like, complete study during my PhD, right at the beginning of my PhD. And it was it was, so I actually pulled it up so I could get the title right. If you want to look it up, it's Event Representations for Automated Story Generation with Deep Neural Nets. So I was doing story generation, and at one point my advisor came up to me and was like, well, there are these neural networks, and they're not great so far, but we could try to do something to try to do something related to story generation to try to get them to work better. And so it was kind of like this gamble, and it ended up paying off, and now it's my most cited paper, and it's like I think it's pretty safe to say it's one of the safest. It's one of the first papers in like neural story generation, which is pretty neat. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of that.
Okay, I guess I go second. My name is Pengguang Zhai. I'm a professor of physics. I came to UMBC in 2014, as Samara introduced. So my research background is in light scattering, basically it's how light interact with particles. The particle here could be atmospheric particles like molecules, cloud droplets, aerosols. They exist in all kinds of different shape, size, and chemical component. So understanding the light scattering pattern of that is critical to our climate system, Earth's climate system, and the weather prediction, dynamic system, all that. So regarding the question that one significant publication I'm proud of goes back to 2010. That was right after my PhD. I had 2 years of postdoc experience, and then that's my first major paper, which is a complete treatment of how light propagating the Earth system. So it covers the theory and model, validation, and application. So it's a very consummate paper, build a stream of work until today. So 15 years later, my research group is still relying on the foundation that I built using that paper. So that's why I'm proud of that paper, in a sense that it is a complete treatment of the theoretical foundation that I'm doing research on today. So that's the background. Thank you. And by the way, the citation of that paper today, I just checked, it goes up to 185 now. So it's making impact. It's just not I am using that. The community is citing that paper as well.
Sarah?
Are you able to hear me okay? Perfect. So for me, if I had to choose one paper, it would literally be the one that I'm working on now. And that's my work on what I'm calling patchwork water infrastructure in the Caribbean. So it feels unlike anything that I've done before. I think because in many ways it's on the one hand deeply personal, and then on the other it's intellectually transformative. So the project really grew out of a moment of frustration for me. I kept on coming across policy documentation, various international reports, as well as obviously academic papers that described Caribbean water systems as failed or underdeveloped, right? Essentially describing it in sort of like a deficit narrative that's judging these systems against this idealized, centralized Western perspective, right? Or Western conception of what a nation's on island's water system is supposed to look like. And so the thing with this sort of like conceptualization is that Caribbean water systems were never constructed in the first place for equity or for proper distribution, right, throughout an island. And most of these regions, in addition to municipal water supply, also obviously rely on like rainwater tanks and stuff like that. And so what excites me about this work is that I'm pushing back against those inherited assumptions, right? Whilst at the same time sort of like grounding my work empirically. And for me, it's about bringing or highlighting the informality that currently exists within the Caribbean waterscape and sort of like showing how that complements municipal water supply for an overall level of resilience in the Caribbean that's not often recognized in the literature. And I think that's really why I'm proud of it. It's because it has the potential to actually shift the conversation, right? And it's not just around Caribbean water governance, but it's also in general about how we think about island water infrastructure more broadly. And if this paper once published actually gains traction, I think it could open up a new conceptual and practical space for more context sensitive and sustainable approaches to water infrastructure, water safety, water resilience for island communities. And so I'm hoping that it does what Dr. Jai paper did for him all those years ago. I'm hoping that this is something that I can build up over time.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing all of those great stories. So our next question is about the research life cycle. So going from research to a published article can sometimes take years and can also go in many unexpected directions. Can you discuss the life cycle of the publication process? So starting from your research and going to, a fully published article or conference paper. And maybe we'll start with Dr. Nibbs and then go backwards in the order that we went in for the first question. You're muted, Dr. Nibbs.
Are you able to hear me now? Okay, thank you. The publication process for me really feels linear. It's much more of an evolution than a sequence. So for me, an idea usually starts as a question, right? And it's a question that is persistent. It won't leave me alone. And so sometimes I turn this around in my head, or I begin to have informal conversations about what I'm thinking, what's coming up for me as I'm going through the literature, what gaps am I seeing, and so on. I often test this out at conference presentations. I do field notes. And for example, with this paper that I'm writing, it began as this sort of like small conceptual frustration, right? It's this sense that the dominant frameworks for understanding Caribbean water systems simply didn't fit what it is that I was seeing in the literature. And so from there, the idea usually goes through several transformations, right? The first stage for me is exploratory. So once the idea is there, once I'm sort of like beginning to notice certain gaps, I do a lot of reading, a lot of sketching. I try to find the right vocabulary for what I'm thinking, right, as I'm working this thing through. And then often I will sort of like present this emerging argument that I'm trying to formulate at a conference or at a poster session. And that stage is really invaluable for me because it gives me a sort of like a reality check, right? It allows me to gauge others' responses to the ideas that I'm working on, where it resonates, where I need to sort of like tweak it a little bit, where I need to add more work to it, where the gaps are. And then after that, I sort of like deepen my work into writing and revision. I let my argument sort of like breathe a little bit, right? I draft, I set it aside, I come back with fresh eyes, I look at it again. And then obviously once that paper is submitted, then there's this whole peer review process, right? And sometimes we all know that takes months, sometimes more. And sort of, I've sort of learned as I'm going on this journey to see the process sort of like a co-production, right? It's where my idea, through all of the iterations and the feedback that I get from others, strengthen and grow to become the paper or book chapter that it will, or report that it will eventually be. And then if I were to sort of like go into the follow-up question, which talks about expanding a conference poster into an article, I think of it as sort of like moving from a snapshot, a picture or a snapshot of a movie into this fuller narrative, right? So in the post, I'm able to just distill the main ideas into some core arguments, right? Into its most essential visual form. It's the what, the why, right? But once I am able to turn that into an article, it means that I'm building out on the how, right? I'm sort of situating it within the literature. I'm expanding the evidence for my arguments. I'm sort of like tracing the implications of the argument that I'm making. And so I'm keeping the energy of the poster, but I'm fleshing it out more. A little bit more, right? I'm adding additional layers, sort of like scaffolding it here and there to make it much more publishable. So that's the process. It's like, I call it a zigzag line. It's like here today, there tomorrow, here today again, there tomorrow, and it continues going until it sort of like reaches its final form. And that's my process. A bit messy, but it works for now.
Dr. Jai, does this look any different for you?
I appreciate Dr. Nibbs' experience. To me, I kind of want to target this question from a different perspective, because my understanding is that our audience here mostly is graduate students or early career professionals. So I want to give you a sense of a longer perspective of career development. So for now, I'm a professor of physics, and so I have been doing this for a long time. I know how to, from the early on of the project, I kind of know what novelty I'm looking for. So namely, all publications need to have certain novelty, more or less. Some paper has more, some paper has less, but you do have to have the novelty to be publishable. For you folks that early on, you probably don't see that well when you're doing a project. So that's why I'm emphasizing that I encourage you to have a good communication with your advisors, either your professors or your direct supervisor. They are more experienced than you, and make sure you talk to them and understand the novelty that it could lead from this project. If you don't understand it, talk to them more. Until you see, okay, your current work doesn't have the novelty yet, but you need to understand down the road, once you achieve a milestone, and you can based upon to get some novel result. And all publications are wrapped around the novelty that you get from the work you are doing, and then keeping a close communication with your advisor so that you can generate publishable plots, tables, data along the road. And then, write up, to me, it's kind of a easier task. Namely, once you have the publishable result, you can always take your time to properly write it out with references, background, and the flow of the logic of the article. That's what I'm trying to emphasize. Basically, seek novelty and keep your critical thinking alive. Thank you.
Dr. Zhao, can you talk about how to locate novelty? I mean,
That's why I'm trying to emphasize the communication with your advisor. The advisor knows the frontier of the research. And if you are doing a RA, or even not RA, just your research credits with your professor, talk to them to understand where is the project going to, what kind of novelty lead to down the road. If you don't understand, don't start without any focus, just trying to talk to your professor about that. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I can jump in this idea of novelty. So computer science moves so fast, and I think a lot of students get dejected when they're working on something and then they see a paper and the paper has some aspect of what they did, but very, very, very rarely it's exactly the same. Like I don't think it's really hard to get to have the exact same idea be done by two people who haven't communicated about it. So usually there is an aspect of novelty that's there that just maybe needs to be teased out a little bit. So maybe instead of so maybe now that paper's out, maybe your methods aren't, or some aspect of your methods aren't as novel anymore, but maybe some other thing that you did is novel and worth talking about still. So yeah, so from my perspective, the research cycle, it looks pretty similar. You look at existing work and you try to find those gaps, and then you start to experiment with like different systems and things. So in computer science, there's usually a lot of engineering work that goes into creating a system that people just don't talk about in papers. So that could slow things down depending on how familiar someone is with the actual tools. And then once the system is ready to go, like maybe we'll try to publish it at a workshop. So workshop is like the conference of other fields. So workshop is a like a kind of a more niche area, and it's attached to a conference. So it's people who are like attending the conference still, like they might either hang around the last couple days to come to the workshops and see what like really kind of unfinished but cutting edge ideas that people are working on, and then you can get that sanity check that Dr. Nibs was talking about, and to make sure that you're on the right track, and then do like a full evaluation. And then the actual publication process is a little different because we're not just submitting to a journal and then like going through multiple rounds. Instead, we're submitting to a conference and playing like reviewer roulette, as they call it, and hoping that the reviewers are reasonable and that they see the value in the work. And sometimes the work does still need some help, and so sometimes those reviews are really helpful. But based on that one round, there's either some conferences will have a rebuttal stage where you get to like kind of defend your reasoning behind doing what you did in the paper. And then if they're convinced or not, that affects whether or not it's actually published in the conference. And then if it's not, then there's probably another conference like a couple of months from now. So there are definitely a lot of options. Things move a lot faster publication wise, but it's a lot trickier to deal with because there's a lot more like outright rejection. And so then it's like, well, now I have to convince a whole new set of reviewers about this paper. And they're pointing out completely different things that the other ones didn't talk about at all. So, but then, yeah, once it's actually published, you get to go to the conference and present it. And so that's one nice thing about publishing or having like the official publication being at a conference is that you actually get to talk about the work in person with people.
So once you have that novel idea and you've transitioned that into a paper or some sort of product, how do you go about selecting which journal or which conference to submit to? So we'll start back with Laura, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Yeah, it depends on the narrative that we're telling with the paper. If it is something that we think that the natural language processing field would value, then we will submit it to the ACL rolling review, which is the Association for Computational Linguistics. They have this rolling review thing where it just kind of like gets put into this one broad publication pile, and then if you want to try to submit to a specific conference, then you commit to that conference after you get the reviews and things. But usually the NLP conferences are all pretty similar in terms of what they're looking for. But sometimes like maybe they're like, I do a lot of interdisciplinary work, and sometimes I don't think that like a regular NLP conference would be the right venue, and so I consider like maybe it's a broader AI conference or a more specific, like maybe like I once had a paper at a social media specific conference, and which I felt was kind of outside of my normal realm of work. And so yeah, it's knowing the audience and what type of things that I think that they'll value, and then shaping the narrative to fit that.
Okay, it's my turn. All right. So I usually consider several factors. First of all is I need to look for a journal that usually publish the work that I do. I mean, the type of work that I do. So the journal, if I search keywords like light scattering or radiative transfer or remote sensing, see how many papers are there. So basically each journal has their own focused scope. So I have to make sure the scope of my work match the scope of the journal. That's first thing that I need to look for. Second one is that I need to look, check the citation record of the journal. So is there a lot of my community, do they read the paper of that journal? If none of my so we are in a research community, right? So we go to a conference, we know a lot of people, and if they don't cite the papers from this journal, I mean, if I publish my paper there, more or less it's going to be forgotten. Nobody will be aware of that. So I kind of wants to know the citation record of that paper. Sorry, a citation record of the journal. Basically, and also open science, it's a big factor now. If you publish in a traditional journal, that people need to pay expensive subscription fees to access that paper. That make it harder for people to access. So I kind of prefer to pay more to publish in the public open access journals. By the way, the citation of the open access journal is much larger than the traditional journal. So that's the factor that I usually consider. Thank you.
Were you implying the journal impact factor?
Yeah. The citation record basically is the same as the impact factor. So yeah, I did not mention that keyword. Thank you.
And for me, it's just about adding to what Dr. Zhao and Dr. Martin has already said. So for me, I actually just started by thinking about feet, right? Both intellectual and audience feet. So for me, it's who do I want this conversation to reach, right? And where is that conversation already happening? And for me, that often means looking at journals that are interdisciplinary, because I'm in the humanities field, and my research, even our department, sort of sits on the fault lines of so many other disciplines, right? Disaster management, disaster science, it's such an interdisciplinary, emergency management, it's such an interdisciplinary field. And so I usually have to look at journals that sit on that sort of like intersection, right, of disaster and emergency management, or governance, or infrastructure studies, or even journals that might look at, for example, island and development studies as well, because my work doesn't just neatly fit into any one box. And then I also look closely at the mission and the ethos of the journal. So does the journal sort of like value critical place-based narratives or submissions? Is it accepting of decolonial perspectives and narratives? Or is it, open to conceptual innovation? Does it sort of like favor more conventional empirical papers, that type of a thing, right? Especially since my primary focus is on islands. So I need that space to sort of be receptive to theoretical reframing rather than just focusing on technical analysis, that type of a thing. And then accessibility, like Dr. Zhao and Dr. Martin mentioned is also another big factor for me. I think about whether the journal is open access or at least broadly accessible to the regional scholars and practitioners that I actually want to read my work, and that I want to benefit most from the work that I'm doing. And then obviously, at the end of the day, I also take impact factor into account, right? But I don't let it drive my decision. Yes, the impact factor tells us something about the reach of the journal, you know, like, oh my God, this journal is top tier, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has resonance with the audience that I want to reach the most, right? Especially if it's like a public policy, that type of a thing. And so sometimes for me, it's about finding the journal that can amplify the argument and connect it to the right networks of scholars and practitioners that I'm looking for, and not necessarily those with like the highest citation index. Maybe that's not the wisest move, but for now, that's really what I've been doing.
Great. I love how all of you kind of touched on the balance of when you're considering where to publish. So I appreciate that. Keeping an eye on the time, I do want to skip ahead for those, our panelists who have the questions listed with them to question what we have number 6. So what has been your experience with rejection or tough reviewer feedback? And how do you keep moving forward? How do you persevere after that? Maybe we can start with Dr. Zhai this time.
Yeah, thank you. This is a quite tough question to answer. I have to admit that I experienced multiple cases of very critical, challenging reviews when I submit papers too. So I guess to cope with that, the top, you kind of want to detach from the comments emotionally. You don't want to say, oh, he trashed or this reviewer trashed my research. It's that because I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I mean, don't let that drive your emotion. That's not good. If you feel that way, put it down. Deal with it a couple of days later. You just need to objectively check the review, see what's the logic, what's the point they are pointing to. So understand that if you can't understand that fully, you find someone, your advisor or someone you trust, you can read it together. And again, critical thinking, right? So is that true or biased view? If it's a biased view or insufficient understanding of your work, you can rebuke it, write it up, and list the evidence that you have. If they do point a hole or gap of your research, deal with it seriously. It make you better. I don't want you to rush through, see, I have to publish this paper right now, so that you just deny all the comments. That's not good. You want to spend time to address those gaps. If it's too large, saying, okay, that's too large of a question you ask, I can't answer in this one paper. Clarify that in your paper, in the introduction, background, or just to clarify, I don't answer this question in this paper. Instead, I focus on this different aspect. Namely, my main thinking is that deal with it more or less objectively, identify the gap, and either clarify the scope, or if you can address the concern as much as you can, and write a good rebuke or providing additional evidence to support your publication. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Nibbs, do you want to go next?
For me, early on, rejection felt really personal, especially, uh, my first paper as a graduate student, submitting and working on. It was a learning curve. It was a learning process, and I'm still in the process of learning actually because I'm an early career faculty member. But bit by bit, I'm learning that critical feedback, however uncomfortable it has made me feel, it's often what makes my work stronger. Although the delivery of some of the feedback can be a little bit scathing, right? But at the end of the day, if you see, if you do an assessment and understand that the feedback is not necessarily a personal attack, but it's aimed at helping you improve your work, then you're able to sort of like put your personal emotions aside for a bit and look objectively at what it is that you're being told. And so I'm learning that rejection and tough review of feedback is part of the academic process, right? It's part of the academic landscape. If you want to publish, you've got to understand that you are going to have your work reviewed. You are going to have people criticizing your work. And it doesn't mean that every criticism you've got to agree with it, but it just means that you've got to sort of like understand that this is part of the academic process. And not see it as a personal setback, right? Rather as sort of like a process to help you to improve your work, right? So for example, we recently had a paper published actually in September, and it took us almost a year, right? And we review the paper, we'd send it back, we'd get it rejected, we'd review the paper, send it back, and it was the most minute and tiny and irritating of things. As a matter of fact, one of even when one of the last reviewers wanted us to change a table, right? She wanted us to split a table into two, and it's like, how can we do that when the table is actually what is sort of like necessary to differentiate between the statistically significant and insignificant values, right? And so again, it's looking at feedback, taking in what is actually going to make your work better, but also recognizing when feedback sometimes is not necessarily helpful, and then being able to, like Dr. Zhao said, push back and say, no, this is necessary. I want to keep it in my paper, that type of a thing. And so I allow myself to feel disappointed for a day or two, but then I go back and I read through the paper more analytically speaking, and I take what's useful, and then I sort of like, point out to the reviewers what I think is not. But it's a tough process and it's a learning process, and it's one that I'm still on. But I have seen and I do know the value of helping me to refine my work, because many eyes sort of like help you to see, hey, you should do this. So maybe you should look at it in this perspective, or maybe you should look aside this scholar because that person is so influential in your field. It may sting a little bit, but most of the times, actually 99.9% of the times, it does make your work better. So expect it. It's part of the academic process.
Thank you. And Dr. Martin, anything to add?
I don't know if I have that much more to add, except I do want to emphasize this idea of like reading the reviews and then taking a day or two before you start responding to them or start like taking them seriously. And I also want to say that like I mean, this hasn't happened to me quite yet, but there are definitely times where like papers will get rejected and rejected and rejected and then end up being best paper somewhere. So I'm hoping that'll happen to me one day, and it'll end up being a best paper award because it's been so refined. But yeah, no, it's rough, and I think in some sense you're always going to take it personally, because if the work matters to you a lot, then it's personal. But yeah, you have to somehow put on your like objective third party hat or somehow and think, okay, well, did I actually answer that, or like was that clear in the paper, or should I make it clearer? And yeah, and also I think that the toughest reviewers are the ones who are the newest to the field. They're like PhD students who are trying to like prove themselves or something, and so sometimes like even just kind of framing it like that helps me a bit because it's like, okay, well, I've made it this far in my career, and they are just being like really nitpicky because maybe they don't know as much about this, and so they're just kind of clinging on to what they do know, and that's fine. And if only they could write a little nicer.
Thank you. So I'm a reviewer for a journal, and this will definitely, I'll keep that in mind if I feel myself going a little harsh, but I hope I don't. But anyway, so something that one of our students are asking in chat, and also it's an upcoming question: how do you go about networking? How do you find colleagues? How do you find people to collaborate with, whether it's within your profession or across other disciplines? I think, how do you start building your, you know, Rolodex, basically? And we'll start maybe with Dr. Jha.
Yeah, my personality is more or less in words, not namely I'm not good at talking to strangers, but I make sure that I go to a conference in my field. That go to a conference, you just need to pay attention to what people are doing, the research. The first time you go to a major conference, it will be more or less overwhelming. I remember I went to AGU for a meeting. It's like 20,000 people over there, a very big conference and large conference rooms, all kinds of different people. But they do have relevant sessions to my research. So I look for the work that is close to my work or relevant to my work, or the topic that is kind of I could potentially learn from. So I go to the conference prepare enough so that I can ask questions, or after they give a talk, after the session, usually there is some time. You just go approach them, say, hey, you had an excellent talk, and I just want to clarify a question that I learned from your talk. Can you talk to me? Usually, I mean, most people are nice. They will give you the chance to talk to them, and there you build, and you make sure you introduce yourself, and give them an idea of what you do, and gradually you can expand your network. That's what I usually do. Thank you.
Dr. Martin?
Sure. So, I have maybe a bit of a unconventional way of talking to people at conferences. So, I have various disabilities, and I get kind of burnt out at conferences, and so a lot of times the connections I make are by people who are also taking a break outside of the sessions. But I think that that's also like a better time to talk anyway. So it like because you can't talk during the sessions. And so yeah, a lot of the connections I make are like just me like I find a spot at a round table and start chatting with the people there, and I find some really interesting people and people who aren't necessarily doing something that's exactly like me, which is kind of neat. Um, I and also like poster presentations are also great because like they they are doing things that are interesting to you. And it's a really great time to have more of a one-on-one or at least a one-on-one type conversation. um, but I think that the 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 most the best connections that I make are either from me like uh having been to several schools at this point, just collecting people at every school and using their networks as well. Um, and also like going to conferences that aren't about about research as much as they're about like career development, or like I went to a computing futures conference, and everyone there was just like fascinating. And so it's like things like that that are getting you to think a little broader, and connecting you with people who are also interested in that broad thinking. And then the way to like kind of keep those connections is to make a note of like what kind of like areas that they're doing, like they're researching, and what they might be interested in. And then if something comes up that I think is somewhat relevant to them, then I'll send them an email, or try to connect with them, and see if they're interested in like whatever opportunity I'm looking at. And that's how the like that relationship with that person actually kind of like moves forward in the collaboration, which I think is probably it's a hard step, and it's something that I think I've worked intentionally on developing over the years of making those connections, and trying to fill gaps in with the appropriate person.
Dr. Nibbs?
So for me, I started. I'm an introvert, so again, it's a bit difficult to just to walk up to people and initiate conversations. But I was very lucky in a way, because I sort of started building my network in grad school, and I made sure to apply for a lot of fellowships, as well as to be part of programs that was quite interdisciplinary. So, for example, one of the fellowship programs that I continue to benefit from knowing people from was an NSF-funded Search Scholar fellowship program that sort of mentored or gave underrepresented groups interested in disaster studies and disaster science an opportunity to be mentored by well-established professors, but also to meet fellow students who were looking at disasters through different lenses. So I met people who were in geography, who were doing forestry, who were doing sociology, and so on. And so this diverse group of scholars became my network. And then the people who mentored me throughout that process have also been incredibly instrumental in helping me to be connected to other people and so on. So if, once you're a graduate student, you have the opportunity to apply for a fellowship, to join some sort of program, I would absolutely advise you to do that, because it sort of plants the seed for you to have connections with people that you will continue to sort of like, as you grow, they're also growing, right? As your network is expanding, theirs is also expanding. And so you guys can tend to bring other people into each other's orbit, sort of share opportunities with each other and so on. And that has been incredibly helpful to me. So I know like some people are very strategic about sort of like fostering their network and building it up and collaborating, but for me, it's just been, interacting with people who sort of resonate with the things that I'm interested in when it comes to research, but also people who are able to expand my thinking in ways that just staying within the narrow disaster emergency management field can't allow me to do. So yes.
Thank you. All right, in our last 5 minutes, I think we'll wrap up with one last question. And so for each of our panelists, if you could go back and give your graduate student self some advice, or one piece of advice about publishing or research, what would it be? Maybe we'll start with Dr. Martin.
I would say it's okay to take things at your own pace. I think that like in computing, like things go so fast, and everyone is trying to like get that next like 1% improvement in whatever. And that it's okay to like look at deeper questions, and and take your time and do things right. And that pays off just as much, or maybe even more than these kind of quick to publish papers.
Dr. Zhai?
Hey, I kind of want to, I learned something, a term called MVP. It's an acronym of minimally viable project. Namely, if you could find a project that is minimally viable, but you can build upon later on. So what I mean is that you don't want to do something so large that you can't accomplish within a reasonable amount of time. You don't want to do a project in 10 years without publishing. You want to say, okay, this is a large scope project that I can surely work on it in 10 years, but I can break that down into smaller units so I can accomplish it and write it and publish it as a milestone of my research and also serve as somewhat of a documentation. This way you keep yourself going, then you know you are making progress. Thank you.
And Dr. Nibs, finish this off.
Thank you. I'd like to say, start early. Don't wait for perfection. Don't wait for the right conditions. Write your thoughts. Write what it is that you're thinking about into existence. Right. As a graduate student, I lived in my head a lot. I spent so much time polishing ideas privately before I shared it with my mentors, before I shared it with my supervisors and with others. And that sort of like wasted a bit of time, I think. Scholarship grows through dialogue, right? Speak to other people, even though you're not comfortable. Find one person, even though you're not comfortable doing it in person, try to do it virtually. Because the earlier you can get your ideas out there, whether it's through conference presentations, whether it's through draft exchanges, whether it's through informal conversations, the stronger and clearer your ideas become, the stronger you're able to determine if this is the road that I want to go on, or if I want to branch over into this thing, right? And I sort of like would also like to say, just start early, as soon as you possibly can, right? Trust the clarity that is actually going to come through this iterative process that is academic research. And also remember that your voice has value, because sometimes we think, oh my God, I can't question this theory, or I can't do this thing because I'm just a graduate student. But think of the work that you're doing as sort of like one pebble that adds to the pile of pebbles that is the academic knowledge in your field. And so your voice does matter, your ideas are valued. Speak to somebody about it, polish it over time, and get it out. It could be a piece in a newspaper, it could be your online blog, it could be a poster presentation, right? Get your ideas out a little bit at a time and polish it and develop it over time, because your thoughts and your ideas, your research does have value. And perfection obviously is not a ticket. It's not an entry ticket, right? It's actually participation and dialogue. So, yes.
That's a wonderful way to end. That scholarship grows with discussion. And so with that, I want to thank our panelists for attending. I want to thank our students. I hope that you guys learned a lot. And as they said, take advantage of this opportunity. Reach out if you see someone here that you can talk to and maybe further your own research. Thank you on behalf of Brianna and I for coming to this conversation. We will be posting a copy of this session in our MyUMBC page, and also we'll be sending a copy of this recording to everybody through email. And with that, have a great rest of the day, and thank you for attending.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Martin, Dr. Zhai. It was a pleasure to meet you again, Semhar, as well as having this conversation with you, Brianna. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Bye,
Take
everybody.
care. Bye.
Bye.